Good morning, everyone. Most of you know that I'm Julie Rowine, the president of the League of Women Voters of Concord Carlisle. And on behalf of our league, I would like to welcome you all to this third in our First Friday series. We will meet for a fourth time again in January, this time on the second Friday, January 8th. I assume that we will all be busy with other things on New Year's Day. And on that day, we will discuss the varied fates of our more tangible effluents. Thank you, Diane, for that phrase. Trash composting and recycling. Our guest today is Concord Department of Public Works Director, Alan Cathcart, John Rogers, who is the Water and Sewer Superintendent, and Alexandra Wallstrom, who is our Senior Environmental and Regulatory Coordinator. Our moderator this morning is Diane Proctor, Chair of the League of Women Voters of Concord Carlisle Concord Town Government Committee, which organizes the First Friday series. Since our founding in 1920, the League of Women Voters has worked to foster civic engagement and enhance access to voting. The League is a nonpartisan organization and does not support or oppose any candidate or political party. The program this morning is being recorded and will be available on our website shortly. And I will now turn the meeting over to Diane. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Julie. That's terrific. I was reading in the New York Times, Alan and John and Alexandra yesterday, a piece on what we all what we all might have suspected. And it says, if you really want to understand what's going on in the city on a basic chemical, biological level, you should be looking at the wastewater, says Eric Alm, the co-director of the Center for Microbiome Informations and Therapeutics at MIT, a company that collects health data from sewage. And what they discovered is that they can anticipate in advance intensity of the coronavirus disease in a community by checking the wastewater. And they can anticipate it by a week to 10 days in advance of its apparent outbreak. I also read in the New York Times about a week ago that as few as 20% of the people in this country, I just said that backwards, 20% of the people in this country do not have functioning sewage systems. 20%. This is in India. We're not talking about China. We're not talking about some sort of rural, remote country. We're talking about our country. 20% do not have functioning sewage systems. The New Yorker had an exquisite piece last week on a woman who is without it, who then eventually died of COVID, but her fight to get a functioning sewage system for her family in Alabama. With that as an introduction, we are so grateful to the work you all do, because we have a functioning sewage system. Yeah. We have an opportunity to say safe thanks to each of you. And we are learning about water that comes in.
Down here, there's a space to say enable.
I'm sorry, is there the effluents that go out? And every effort we can undertake to understand the hard and good work you all do. So with that, Alan, take it away.
Well, thank you, Diane. And again, Alan Cathcart, Director of Concord Public Works. Little background, I've been in Concord for almost 25 years now. I was the former water sewer superintendent for the better part of my stay. With that, I've sort of acquired a lot of information, have been involved with a lot of programs, and kind of moving forward, I'm passing the batons along to John Rogers, who will be, is adept at sort of water resource issues, and he's an engineer, and kind of looking forward to passing the reins along to him. But given he has just 3 months of experience, I thought it'd be best if I was kind of, Diane mentioned, presentation of the water wastewater. I thought I would sort of pull off some old slides and kind of work with John and Alex Wallstrom. Alex has almost, is it 10 years, Alex, or close to it, or 7?
It's 9, almost 9.
9, all right, in the middle there. Alex is done a lot on our water quality, water resource management aspect. So it'd be nice for them both to hear, as you know, and engage in the conversation, hear your questions and concerns, because they're going to be sort of picking it up and, you know, moving forward. So with that said, when Diane gave me the opportunity to speak, I said, I love talking about, I really do enjoy these subject matters. And it's always changing. As Dan mentioned, you know, there's been a lot of history and evolution in both drinking water and wastewater. And, you know, there's COVID and the whole use of biobots and monitoring wastewater stream. It's kind of fascinating technologies, but I'm going to take you back based on the conversation with Diane to the beginning in Concord, because it's interesting. And if you've heard it, great. If you haven't, you might find it kind of fun. But Concord has been, I'd say, ahead of the curve from the very get-go. So with that said, I also want to say with technology, Bob, I was able to change your name as a co-host. It gave me all sorts of privileges. So that was kind of fun as we learned the skills and tools of Zoom. It's actually providing, I think, some improved opportunities for communication. So this very opportunity, I think, is going to be enhanced because we can kind of see you, as well as, you know, show you screens that's going to be helpful to see. So with that, I'm going to go to, I believe, when I'm going to ask what you all see once I put this on the screen. Do you see introduction?
Perfect, Alan. Yeah,
Okay.
it's perfect. Yeah.
All right. So let's see if we can move to the next. All right.
Alan, while you're setting this up,
Yes.
Alan will be presenting this in sections, folks. And then at the end of each section, we'll have a chance to have people raise their hands or put questions in the chat box. And Carlin Reed will be monitoring the chat box. So we have two ways of communicating and creating a conversation. Thanks, Alan.
Okay. And I will actually identify what I'm going to talk about, so you'll know if it's going to come. You can wait until we get to that section. So Diane asked an interesting question. A lot of people don't really know Concord Public Works has a lot of impact in the community. And just as an overview, just wanted to share with you that we have a number of divisions within Public Works. We have an administration division that involves and includes senior management, as well as our trash and recycling activities. We have an engineering division that do design and oversight of capital improvements in the right-of-way and construction activities. We have a highway. Can you see my pointer? I just want to make sure everything's working right. Okay. We have a highway grounds group. And within that group, we do highway maintenance, cemetery, park and tree work, fleet maintenance. We have a lot of our heavy equipment and vehicles, and building maintenance as well. We have, on another operation side, the water sewer group, and that's what we're going to be focused on today. And in that group, we have technical people who deal, like Alex, on regulations and water quality issues. We have a wastewater treatment group. It's contract operations, a third party who comes in and actually runs our wastewater plant. We have a treatment and pumping line division. These are operators who are mechanically inclined. They work with our pumps and chemical systems and treatment processes. And then we have a distribution collection system group. And those are the guys you typically see out in the trucks around town, say water division. They're doing the line work. They're doing work on the sewer, collection system, water distribution, service work, replacing your meters. So you can see Concord Public Works has a lot of impact, and a lot of essential services are provided. And through COVID, we've been pretty much operating 24/7, providing all these services. With the one caveat, the offices haven't been open to the general public, but the services have been available and continue to be both electronically through phone, and obviously the water, wastewater, streets are going to be plowed when it snows tomorrow. Everything's going to continue to operate as it needs to. So that's an overview of the entire Public Works. I'm going to kind of pass over this. It's a little bit more of the detail of the water sewer division. So the overview, I'm going to talk about the history of the municipal water system. I'm going to talk about the sources and how they've evolved. I'm going to talk about the distribution system. That's the water mains and services that connect the sources to your homes and businesses. I'm going to talk about the water quality. We're going to talk about demand management. That's a very important component of our programs and evolving as we speak. I'm going to talk about NAGOG. I know there's a lot of interest about NAGOG Pond, so we will have a section to talk about NAGOG Pond. Then I'm going to go into the municipal sewer. Same thing, history, the treatment, the collection system, and then we're going to sort of wrap things up with an integrated water resource management concept. So as I go through these, I'll stop after each if people have questions and we can kind of entertain them. But so you can see that's where we're headed. Any guesses of anybody know what this particular image is? I've shared it in presentations in the past, but anybody have a clue? I can't see hands right now, but.
Most people are muted, so.
Okay, I will tell you what that is rather than go. This is the inside of the Pine Hill Water Storage Reservoir. It's a beautiful structure. I mean, it looks like something you, it's just, water infrastructure is pretty magnificent. I'd like to say, you know, we have the funds for the Richardsonian type, you know, infrastructure today and architecture. We don't, but, you know, some of the water infrastructure around the country and world are just, you know, pretty spectacular. But this is inside one of two storage chambers up on Pine Hill. One of my favorite slides, back at the turn year 2000, there was lots of stories and articles about the 20th century and innovation and technology and things. I love this slide, this was one article I came across that talked about the 10 successes that shaped the 20th century American city. And if you kind of read through this list, you'll identify and be familiar with a lot of these concepts. But these are things that have been sort of you know, key to, you know, what makes our cities and towns function. What I appreciate most is when you get to the number one. Number one is the provision of pure water and effective sewage treatment. So I've always enjoyed, wherever I go, without potable, clean water or wastewater service, you really can't, that's the foundation of any community. And that's where it all starts. And Concord, obviously, you know, has a rich history, but it does depend on the natural resources. And that's what sort of allowed Concord to become what it is today. When you look back in the early days, this literally is a delivery system for water, you know, and back before there were sources of supply, you had to get it somehow to your individual homes. But I just love this image of horse-drawn water supply. And I'm going to come back to this slide later. And then managing the wastewater and, you know, in any form, you know, getting it out of the you know, the house, or, you know, having, you know, the luxuries of plumbing just is not really appreciated by a lot of the world. And we take it for granted. But in any event, how did this happen? This is in the beginning. The town, the advent of water supply was to look at gravity. We didn't have power supplies. We could have pumps and that sort of equipment. So you looked at resources, natural resources that would deliver enough water, high quality, under pressure to a community. So I don't know if you know or not, but, you know, Concord's first supply we took from Sandy Pond in Lincoln, and there was legislative authority to do that. Why in Lincoln? Because it was in higher elevation. We had a need, and we had a young engineer named William Wheeler, who was literally a Concord native, who was a drainage expert. And at the age of 22, William Wheeler proposed a design to bring water from Sandy Pond in Lincoln to the center of town. And you can kind of see here, this is Sandy Pond, this is Route 2 over here, this is Walden Pond over here. So literally taking the water from here into the center of town. It was a gravity water distribution system. And this is an image not of Sandy Pond, but one you can imagine would be very similar in its day of, building infrastructure, pipes that connected to the surface water, then ran through gravity to the center of town. William Wheeler created, this is one of his early maps and plans of the water system in Concord. And he not only designed the infrastructure, but he also got it, he oversaw the construction. He was a construction administrator. And this is all, he did all this work before he was 24 years old. And this is another image, kind of historic image of a waterworks in its Waitsboro, Washington state. However, it's kind of fascinating. Concord celebrated December 3rd, 1874. The water system was activated. And there was great to do about it was written up in the records about the water flowing up over the highest building in town, probably, the townhouse. But really the bringing water to the center of town was it's not just about potable water, it was fire protection as well. That was why water systems were designed the way they are for both fire protection as well as potable water. Interesting, over time, we've learned some lessons about sometimes they don't necessarily coexist so well as far as size of pipes and pressures and that sort of thing. So I'm going to go back. We had development over the better part of 50 years where the town expanded, the water distribution and infrastructure expanded, and we went from relying solely on Sandy Pond to getting water rights and activating Nagog Pond. Again, Nagog is outside of Concord, but higher elevation, more water available. So as the town expanded, it was able to get the rights for Nagog Pond, and that we're going to talk about that a little bit. But what's interesting is, come the 50s, we had really extended our distribution system and needed to find alternatives. And fortunately, by the 50s, there was now electric infrastructure around town that allowed us to power pumps and motors and things that we needed to do, where you could now extract water from the ground. So again, the evolution of Concord is similar to other supplies around the country. If you don't have power, surface water is your go-to source. Most of the larger reservoirs are sort of constructed. You look at MWRA, their supply is from central Massachusetts, not the Boston urban area. And that's the case in all of these large metropolitan areas. So it's not unusual to have your source of supply outside your jurisdictional area of, where the service. That'll come into play in a bit. So groundwater is a fascinating opportunity for new water. And I don't know if people kind of appreciate, but when you are standing, say, up on this little bluff over here on the land surface, it's dry. And you often hear there's groundwater below you. And a lot of people don't really understand what that means or, how does it actually work? But there's a saturated zone, which has pores, and it can be sand and gravel from glacial activity, or it could be bedrock with fractures. Both can yield water. In the 50s, there's really not a lot of technology that could drill through the bedrock and sort of draw from bedrock. But today, if someone were putting a private well in, they'd likely draw from bedrock. The town has somewhere between 30 to 80 feet of saturated groundwater, what we call the overburden or glacial outwash, sands and gravels, that can yield anywhere between 500,000 gallons a day in certain areas to up to 1 million, depending on its supply. So the question becomes, with a power supply, how do you extract it? And so this is in essence a large, municipal size pump and column. They drill a well down into the saturated area. They have a large casing. They pack gravel around it to protect the screened area. And again, this is, town of Concord has developed a number of groundwater supplies, and it's very interesting into the history of quality of water in town, as well as the reliability and resiliency of our supply. So this is today represents all of the sources of supplies that we have. Now it's interesting, large urban environments may have a couple sources, Wachusett Reservoir, Quabbin Reservoir, for instance, for Boston. For Concord, we have 6 different groundwater supplies. We have 1 surface water supply. We're a small system, but we're cobbled together with different sources in different areas. And each one of those combined allow us to provide reliable supply year round. When we lose a source for a mechanical problem or there's a water quality issue, it has an impact. We literally design our system around multiple sources of supplies and how we manage them. So over the past 50, 70 years, we've developed this network. I'll take a pause and ask if anybody really has any questions at this point on kind of the history of the town source of supplies. Any questions? Anybody want to offer anything at this point?
People will have to put them in the chat box, Alan, because they can't, everybody's muted unless.
Okay.
So
I'll
Alan,
continue.
I have a quick question. How
Please.
many gallons of water does Concord need per day in order to serve our community?
I'm going to give you a quick answer. It ranges between 1.5 million and 4 million. And I have a slide that's going to get into that later on demand management.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll move on to the distribution network, which is also very important to really characterize what are the assets, what does a water system consist of? We talked about the sources, that's kind of natural. How we draft from it, which require pumps and mechanical systems, and then this network of pipes. And the pipes range, when we talk about a distribution or water main, generally between a 6-inch diameter and our largest is a 16-inch diameter pipe. If you were to go into a metropolitan area, you'd get 48-inch pipes and much larger. But it's the hydraulics sort of dictate the size of the pipe, and the condition and age of the pipes vary based on the development as well as replacement schedules over time. And we typically say a pipe has a useful life, and we're kind of learning as we go because its infrastructure has a useful life of somewhere between 75 and 125 years, depending on, and we're finding that. And as time tells, we might learn more, but we can see failures for pipes that are only 50 years old, and we can see good integrity for pipes that are 100 years old. So it's a general rule of thumb, but what's very important is when you look at the color code here, you'll see, the red pipe represents pipe that's been in place, pre-1925. So the red lines are pipes that are over 100 years in age. And we have various colors. You see yellow, a lot of yellow was installed from the 50s to the mid 70s. A lot of development went on at that time. And you see some of the bluer pipe, 2000 to present, generally represents new development or replacements that we may have done over time. But the infrastructure and value of that infrastructure, present worth is around $24 million of assets. And that's important because what we're maintaining and improving, is significant value. However, in fact, our existing systems characterized, you see from the 1 surface water NAGOG, the 6 groundwater supplies, pump stations, the two reservoirs. I showed you an image of Pine Hill. We also have one at Nursnack. Those are, they become sort of the ability to fill when the demand is less than what we're pumping, and they supply when the demand is more than what we're pumping on any given moment. So that's why you have steady flow from your home, but the pumps turn on and off depending on demand and season. And you can see over 130 miles of pipe, and we have over 1,300 fire hydrants that are used both for quality as well as fire protection. That infrastructure comes with, expenses to maintain. We have operators. You can see here's a picture of operators using, this is sort of a neat little gadget, an electronic operator that turns valves in the ground. Water distribution, excuse me, is a lot like your home plumbing, but on a much bigger scale. So when you need water, you open and close valves, your sink, and water flows. Well, if we need to manage the water distribution system, if there's a break and we need to isolate, so we can do a repair, we have large valves that are out there. So we need to exercise and make sure they can be operable when necessary. Sometimes, we have problems, and you'll see, unlike your plumbing, it's a little more difficult to get access to it. So anytime there's an upset, it's a pretty significant undertaking to get access to the infrastructure, heavy equipment, operators, specialized equipment. You can see the pipes are generally buried somewhere in 5 to 6 foot range. The reason for that is frost. And so we like to get these pipes below the frost line. I mean, you can see the scale. This is, probably an 8 or 12 inch pipe. Maybe it's a 12 inch, with a valve. So, we may do repairs on the pipe, and sometimes, if it's really necessary, we may actually replace. And this shows sort of a spot replacement of what we call a valve assembly. But this allows us to control flow in multiple directions when and if we ever need to. We schedule, and you'll see in our capital plans often in the water fund, a scheduled area where we'll do replacement in a neighborhood. And that's where we go back to that image of some of the older pipe or pipe that is failing. And we will replace generally somewhere between a half mile of pipe and a mile of pipe a year. It's historically been about a half mile. We have been doing work over the Peter Spring Road area this year. We did some work on Potter Street this year as well, but that's, we're looking at somewhere around $1 million to $2 million of investment to do that work. Our budget right now is about $600,000 on average. It's probably not enough, but it's more than a lot of systems invest. And, we keep our eye on that, and we're looking at technologies to evaluate the need for replacement, as well as looking at replacement alternatives of completely excavating. When you dig a trench, you have a significant impact. And if you go into any of the neighborhoods and we go in, we tell you it's going to have, this is construction. And there's a saying, in order to, you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. That's what we're about. We have to go in, we have heavy equipment, we have traffic impacts. We have, there's a hassle factor to it, but it's necessary because we need to get in, we need to replace this infrastructure. And we typically dovetail this with working with a light plant, making sure we know what their plans are, working with the engineering division in Public Works, making sure we know what the roads program looks like so that we can get in before they may have a reclaim project or something like that. So we try to do it as efficiently as possible, but it is a significant undertaking with a significant cost. I'm going to transition into water quality. Does anybody have questions? You want to field any on the distribution system at this point?
Yes, I think Carlin in the chat box. Carlin, can you share some of the questions that you're hearing?
Sure, Alan, it's been a very thought-provoking piece already. I have 4 questions for you.
Sure.
Do you want me to give you one question at a time or all 4 at once?
I have a bad memory. One at a time is great.
Okay, all right. one question that we had was, when will the Brewster well be developed?
Okay. Brewster well is a well that we secured, very fortuitous, early 2000s. There was a agricultural land that went, was going to go on the market. And I can't recall how many acres, might have been, you know, over 20 acres, or maybe 16, up off of Balls Hill Road. So up at Monument Street, Balls Hill Road. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go back to that slide just so you can see what we're talking about. It is kind of helpful. Here. Here it is. And you see Brewster well. We were able to secure the land using water funds in a special town meeting with unanimous support to identify this as a, if we ever need it, we're going to develop. We talked about there's only finite amount of water we can extract from the ground. And most of our supplies, if you look, are down in the southern section of town. And that's because the geology is different in the northern section of town. But there is some sands and gravels up here we're able to identify. And we put it on hold to protect it. It's presently under protection. In fact, our initiative helped with this Autumn Farm now, the conservation land around it's now sort of dovetails nicely with our open space. We are not planning on developing that until we need to. And need to is going to be based on demand or quality issues that might, you know, inform moving forward with that. We went through almost all the permitting back in the early 2000s to see what the yield would be. We think there's about 500,000 gallons a day of supply, but that is on hold until necessary. So there is no plan in our next 10 years. That could change. NAGOG speaks to that, and we'll talk about that. But at this point, it's not on our, we develop a 10-year pro forma or plan on our water fund. Brewster is not part of that next 10-year plan. If something changes, and it could, and we're going to talk about that, this may be prioritized sooner rather than later. Okay.
Got it. Thanks. Second question I have is, on that same slide, does the Anersnack Hill Reservoir water come from Nagog Pond? This is a question from Janet.
Okay, so I'm going to point out Anersnack this is the reservoir. These are where water fills. They're not a source of water, but they get water from our wells and Nagog. And also we have Pine Hill. That's a reservoir as well. So I'm now going to go to the following. See this network? This is the pipe distribution system. It is all interconnected, much like your veins are interconnected. And you have one heart that's pumping, but it's pumping blood throughout the entire body. We have a number of hearts. We have each well represents a different source of pumps and pulsing, but those contribute and mix and blend into this distribution system. So it's, for general sense, you can see the closer you are to one of these sources where you live, when it's in operation, your percentage of water from that source is probably more than someone who lives in a different section of town. The waters blend regularly and wells come on and off, and there's a blend. So Nagog, we've only been using, historically when Nagog was the sole source of supply in the 50s, actually there was Sandy Pond and Nagog. Everything is fed by Sandy Pond and Nagog. Then Nagog, we used to pump over 2 million gallons a day from Nagog, and that fed most of the town's supply during the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And then we started introducing groundwater and blending it. But the long answer to that question is it's a blended supply. So Anersnack during the summer, which is located right over in this area here, is probably getting water. This is Nagog Pond. It's being pumped and it's filling Anersnack, but it's also feeding the rest of the town as well. And when Nagog isn't running, some of these other wells are now back feeding this area and filling the Anersnack. So there's a blended quality and distribution system that allows us and requires us to blend. It is not easy. The challenge for a small system like Concord is we have a lot of variability, and that variability introduces complexity, which I wish I had the simple problems of MWRA. We have a much more complex system than they do on the water, just based on scale and the need to be managing in a very deliberate, strategic way. So does that answer that question?
Yes, it does. So 2 more questions on this section. The first one is from David. What is the time and day of the greatest demand?
It varies. It's always seasonal right now, although I love this story. This is great. Today, somewhere in July, August, depending on where we are, we typically see July, early July is when we get the greatest demand, but it varies depending on the year. It's not any given day, but we get demands up at 4 million gallons. When I first got here, there were 4.5 million gallons a day. We had higher demands back in the 70s and 80s, which is interesting. So, but back at the turn of the, when the original water system was installed, the biggest challenge the water department had in its day, this is the early 1900s, was people using water, flowing water all winter long to keep their pipes from freezing. They didn't have heating systems. So they literally had emergencies in the middle of the winter where they were overdrawing their system. And as we go out in the summer and we have our declarations for water emergency, they used to do declarations in the winter because of freezing pipes. Kind of interesting. So generally it's mid-summers and we have our peak period.
Okay. All right. And then the last question I have with this section, I think it's from Tanya. Why are some residences not connected to the water supply or to the sewer systems?
Okay, so I'll talk on the water supply. Water, 95% of our community is served by town water. The reason some areas are not supplied by water is cost benefit. It's very expensive to put water infrastructure, especially big pipes, in areas that are isolated. There's not a lot of a way to share the burden of the cost for construction. And the cost of construction in these isolated areas are generally related to geology where there's lots of bedrock, and that just increases the cost to do excavation. So it's really a cost benefit. And so you do an analysis of, if I put a private well in, I'm probably looking at $10,000 to $20,000. If I had to go to the town and extend the system, it's not a town benefit, it's a private benefit. And that's how we sort of administer the extensions and expansions of our infrastructure. You'd probably be looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars per customer to get that town water. So that's really a cost benefit. And it's really based on proximity to the existing system.
That's it.
And the sewer?
Thank you, Alan. This is
No.
amazing.
And the sewer system, please?
All right, I'm going to get to the sewer system and I'll answer that question when I get to the sewer system. Okay. So I'll continue out with the water. Go right down. Quality. So quality, one of the challenges with quality, or there's a couple. Most people are most concerned, and historically, with visual, taste, odor issues. Those are the things, those are the aesthetics that really were a metric back when water supplies are first developed. How does it taste? How clear is it? How cloudy is it? Is there iron or is there sort of any minerals in it? Things that could be sort of displeasing. Early on, we realized that without disinfection, there was a lot of disease and outbreaks, dysentery and cholera and that sort of thing. So a lot of systems back in early in their development started with disinfection and different types of disinfection, but that's sort of a a biological challenge. And most people don't see that, but that was an advent of public health. We also are learning more about chemical, sort of contaminants as well. So basically, the purpose for treatment are one or all of the above. And systems are evolving to try and keep up with the information as well as technology. But what you see here is, a flushing, when we have routine flushing in our distribution system, it's because of naturally occurring iron and manganese that are in the bedrock and in sand and gravel formations. And when they collect and they oxidize, they settle in the distribution system and they create a particulate that we need to flush out of the system regularly. There's an alternative, which is we can install treatment at the source. Historically, that had been very expensive, but at some point you reach the point where the impact on the customer is so great, it's better to treat at the source than just routine maintenance or flushing out in the distribution. So we've sort of learned over time that we need a combination of both. We do a lot of testing to ensure there's the quality control of our supply. And as I mentioned, each of our sources have different chemistry and quality. But what we do is a combination of, bacteria as well as, we test for chlorine because there's a certain amount of chlorine, that's our disinfection. We use a sodium hypochlorite right now and ozone. And we want to make sure there's a residual. It's in the water to protect regrowth of bacteria. And when I said, sometimes the fire protection challenges don't marry well with the drinking water challenges, large pipes have large residence time or time where water is standing. And if you have a camp that you go to and you don't use the water, you go to that camp and you're on a well. When you get there, you probably don't take a drink of water as soon as you walk in the house. You probably have to run the water, flush it, know that, the water's been sitting for a while. When you're talking about 12-inch diameter pipes, if the water isn't being used, it can get stagnant. And so the disinfection needs to be able to have a residence time or, allow us to ensure that there is no regrowth for bacteria. So that's why we do monitoring for things like chlorine, which are additives. But as Alex can attest to, and you have specific questions, we do regular monitoring of over 130 compounds. Many are driven by regulatory requirements, which is based on kind of experience and lessons, through EPA and DEP. We get into a universe where we call them emerging contaminants. And this is a big challenge to a lot of systems because it's the next frontier of contaminants. And when I said these aren't things that necessarily impose a taste, odor, smell, but these are can be at levels that we've gone from parts per million of detection, which we used to think was remarkable. We could test things to 1 part per million to a part per billion. We thought that was remarkable. The amount, a part per billion, we're measuring it, monitoring it, and care about it. We're now into a universe of compounds that we care about in the parts per trillion level. We're developing, it's kind of like taking a telescope. It's like looking up into the sky and say, what can you see with your naked eye? That's what we cared about earlier on. Then we got a telescope. Now we start seeing more and we go, oh, we should be aware of these particular chemicals in our water. And now we're getting, Hubble spacecrafts that are giving us the universe. It's that kind of level. The order of magnitude of these risks and concerns continue to kind of challenge the industry to stay on top of, the measuring as well as treatment. And as I go back to this slide, all of these sources are a little bit different. And they're impacted by natural conditions as well as land uses around them. And the land uses include commercial as well as residential impacts. And that sort of relates a little bit to some of the wastewater questions we have. The conditioning at all of our supplies, because they blend, they have to marry each other. You can't have reactions going on one source reacting with a different source and making an impact to a neighborhood. So we blend, and we have to condition them so they can blend cooperatively, for lack of a better word, without a negative outcome. And so this is one of our pumping stations, a small brick kind of building. It's got a well located inside it, and inside that, people want to know what's inside these things. Well, these are just, basic, kind of batching or processes of, what we call conditioning chemicals. We had pH adjusters. We had sequestriants to sort of bind iron or manganese so it doesn't come out in the distribution of your service line. We fluoridate the water. And, that's been controversial in the past, and we've had town meetings about fluoridation. But we've been doing this for, since the 70s, and we disinfect as well. That's the baseline treatment at all of our supplies. Above and beyond that, the first level of treatment that really exceeded that was over at Deaconess Well site. And I don't know if you're familiar with Deaconess, that's right across from the Concord Country Club. But this was the old building, kind of the conventional pump and conditioning. This new facility, it looks beautiful. I'm really pleased with this kind of barn-like feature. It is a water treatment facility. Don't know if you know that when you drive by on Ornac. But inside, you have much more sophisticated, elaborate processes and equipment. Every time we talk about the next generation of treatment, you start increasing the complexity of the treatment processes. You increase the complexity of the treatment processes, you increase the costs, and you increase the need of operators who are able to manage and maintain and support that infrastructure. Our water division we continue to evolve and get the expertise and staffing on board to manage the systems in today's needs, which are very different than they were just 30 years ago when I getting into this business. The complexities are remarkable, and the technology expands to, you may have heard me use this term, SCADA. It's a supervisory control and data acquisition. That's the acronym, SCADA. It's used in a lot of industries to automate processes. So in the old days, you had an operator turning a valve or adjusting a pump. Now you have computers that do a lot of this in an automated way. They monitor more parameters. The monitoring requires instrumentation that's sophisticated. It needs to be managed and maintained. And they control the equipment and operate valves and backwashing systems and all sorts of things that are integrated into a logic controller. And then you have operators with technology that can remotely get informed of changes of condition. So even though the systems are sophisticated, we are challenged with having a few operators that literally have to prioritize where are they at any one minute to do routine operation and maintenance or respond to a trouble call. And the trouble call can be 24/7. But they have technology, literally smartphones, they can bring up information and know real time what's happening at various facilities. So that's on the water quality and treatment processes. Haven't talked about NAGOG yet. Any questions on that?
Carlin, do we have any questions that are?
Yes, I have 5 questions. 4 of them come from Janet Rothrock, and 1 comes from our president, Julie Rothwein. I'm going to ask Julie's first, and then I'll get to Janet's 4 questions. Julie asks, about 10 years ago, the pH at her house turned from 7 to 8. She knows because she had a fish tank. Why would it have changed so suddenly? This is an area on Hillside Ave. So that's from Julie.
Actually, it's Peggy, not Julie. I'm logged in as her. So
my apologies. It's Peggy. I should have known by Hillside Ave.
So Carlin, on these water quality questions, I'm going to let Alexandra Wallstrom answer them because she knows better than I. And I also want you to have a chance to hear from Alex directly, because if you have a question, even after this, on water quality or treatment, you'd probably be talking to Alex anyway. So Alex, you want to step forward and respond?
Yes, so we do adjust the pH at all of our facilities to kind of make it so that it's less corrosive to internal plumbing. And that's something that we are constantly monitoring. So there may have been some type of, short period of time where there was a spike in the adjustment, which our operators would have been notified by kind of through that SCADA system that Alan was referring to. They would have gotten an alarm that things weren't kind of matching up with what our regular treatment pH dose is actually expected to be, because we're typically looking for a 7.3 out there in the system. So there are some things that internal plumbing, you may have had something kind of going on in there, but we would have kind of known if there was something going on in the system. We would have made any corrections to any pH or alterations that were going on in the system. So I'm imagining it was kind of a short period of time where there may have been something, and all of our wells and supplies are alarmed and programmed so that if one of these water quality parameters was way outside of what we expect it to be, it kind of automatically shuts down the station so that we're not providing water that doesn't meet our specifications out into the distribution system. So it's not going to customers' homes or businesses.
I'll add to that, the range of pH can fluctuate, but they're different systems. So it's really the blending that we care most about. But I know, for instance, MWRA targets a pH over 9 for their entire system, for some of the lead and copper, control. So the range is, there's two things that speaks to is, as Alex said, operators may adjust or modify. That's one step. But if it was really, an issue with the operations, it would automatically shut off, and there'd be a response in that way. But the range of anywhere between 6.5 and 8 doesn't sound unusual.
Great. I've got 3 questions about testing. I'm going to put them all together because it's a nice package. First one is, this is from Janet. Where is the water drawn for testing? Second, do you still get opposition to fluoridation? And third one from Linda is, are we testing for PFAS? And I confess I don't know what PFAS is.
Well, I'll start with the kind of locational question. We test in a variety of different locations throughout town. So we have, we test at all of our supplies when they're kind of in operation twice per month for bacterial purposes. And then we have different locations throughout town that are basically locations that are accessible 24 hours a day in the event of an emergency. So for example, I sample at the fire station, the police station, a couple of other facilities in town, and just to kind of get characteristic water quality in different sections of town as things vary with the blending and which supplies are in operation. So it does depend, but we do sample at all of our supplies and that kind of predetermined locations throughout town. And then I can't recall what the.
Do you still get opposition to fluoridation, and are we testing for PFAS?
As far as fluoridation, I don't hear very much about it any longer, kind of since we had the whole town meeting thing a couple of years ago. I don't frequently get calls about fluoridation. So I think that one has kind of taken a back seat for now. And kind of as far as PFAS, that's kind of the acronym PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkylated substances. And so that's kind of one of those emerging contaminants that Alan has referenced earlier. And so in Concord, we tested as part of the UCMR3, or Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule, which kind of wrapped up back in 2014. So we did sample at the entry point to the distribution, or finished water from all of our supplies at that time for the commonly the hot button PFAS contaminants. And at that point in time, we did not have any detections of PFAS from any of those supplies. And kind of lots of things are changing. You probably have heard about PFAS in the news and all of those kinds of things. So there's been lots of different tactics in different states or at the federal level as far as what's the appropriate testing, what's the appropriate methodology, sampling procedures. So everything is kind of in flux and still being developed. So recently, Massachusetts did kind of set a standard for that, and they will be requiring us to sample. So we're kind of working with Mass DEP for appropriate guidance for how to sample and provide results in a responsible, accurate manner.
Okay, that sounds good. I've got two last questions, and I'm going to put those two together. Can you describe the Nursnack Hill reconstruction project, and what is or will be the impact of the pandemic on the water and sewer budgets? Who wants that?
I'll speak to the Nursnack. So basically, a Nursnack was through our capital planning, original concept was a potential replacement of that reservoir. It's a 2.5 million gallon reservoir that was, it's a concrete basin with a aluminum geodome on top, kind of a fascinating structure. The cover is intended to protect it from critters and contaminants. The assessment and budget impact had us readjust the scope, so it became a rehabilitation, not a replacement. And the rehabilitation consists of just replacing the floor and liner of that concrete structure itself. And that is planned to be done. We had hoped to do it in the fall. It looks like it's going to be more of a winter project. It is out to bid. We don't have the bids back, but we're hoping to have that completed by spring. That's our target. And most of the work is going to be inside the existing structure. So that's the nursing home.
Great, thanks. Now, who wants to handle the pandemic question? How is it impacting the water and the sewer budget?
Oh, okay. So in the budget, that's a great question. It is not really affecting, how is it affecting our operations? It's made it very challenging to do everything we do, because a lot of our operations, we don't have the luxury of remote work. In some cases we do, and some of the work we can do remotely, but a lot of our work is hands-on. And in fact, even with the construction, you've seen we continue to do work out. We did the water main replacement in Peter Spring and Potter. It's just challenging to do everything the best we can with appropriate hygiene, social distancing, protection of operators, and exposure. As far as quality to the customer, it's affected a little bit of our attention to what's the word? Some of the meter replacement activities and things that are more optional. Unless it's essential, we probably don't go into residents, for a routine, purposes. But it really hasn't had effect on us, other than it just made it a little bit more challenging. And some of the costs, it has had an impact, I think, on schedules of construction. For instance, I'll talk about the Lowell Road Assabet pump stations or sewer stations that are getting rehabbed, complete work, to the tune of $2 million. And it's been affecting deliverables for materials. And that's an impact. It's more scheduled than anything. But other than that, to the general customer, you're not seeing a change. COVID is not an issue. It's not a waterborne issue. The disinfection we provide is sufficient protection there. It's not a source. And on the wastewater side, our operators have to be that much more careful when they're working in the wastewater, collection system, which they continue to do. But again, it's about, personal protection equipment, that sort of thing.
Got it, thanks. Back to you, Diane.
Thank you, Alan. This is fascinating. Okay, next stage, here we go.
Okay, I'm gonna go through this a little. I see the client, we're moving time at what said 10:30. Okay, I'm gonna try and move quickly through the demand management. Important, the question came up, what does our peak demand look like and when? You can see this slide shows a couple things. Our average day demand, this is for all, residents and commercial customers, all of our customers, about 2 million gallons a day. During the winter, as I said, it drops down about 1.5 million gallons a day. The average, summer, you can see is a little higher, is 2.4 4 million, almost 2.5 million. And that's average over the entire summer, May to September. The peak is, whether it's a peak day, we typically see peak days of up at, over 3.5 million, and it varies depending on. But what our real concern is not just a peak day, but it's the 3-4 days in a row of high demand. We can't sustain that. And these lines on this table here, this shows the 2.1 is a limit. It's a regulatory limit. We shouldn't be averaging more than 2.1 million gallons on average over a year. So that's a regulatory constraint. With the summer pumping capacity, you can see if we are down a station, and it's not unusual to have a facility down for service or maintenance, these things are running 24/7. 3 million is about where we're at. And this is inclusive of Nagog Pond operating. So we need this. And what you'll say is we can typically meet average day, but if sustained peak day for more than a few days, that's a problem you're going to hear from us saying, you got to slow down. And what you can see here is with all facilities operating, we can get up to about 4 million gallons a day, but that means everything is 100% efficient and operable and available. Demand is driven by, here's a kind of a profile. You can see the commercial institutional uses. We have the hospital and regional supply, Emerson and MCI. We have the residential is 61% of our, it's, the community. It kind of makes sense. This is basically kind of the serve. We measure, and we're starting to look at regulations that focus on residential customers and what their average day demand is. That's a metric we care about when we're talking about conservation. And the state has a standard of 65 gallons per day per capita. And looking at some surrounding communities, you can see Concord's around 65 or 66 here. Historically, this would not have been a problem. It's just, okay, we know we're close. Moving forward, this may be an issue. This may be a regulatory stick that's held, Concord's hit with. If we can't bring that down, it's not unusual. If you look at Lexington, Lincoln, those are communities like Concord, the same kind of profile. If you look at places like Acton, Sudbury, they're kind of similar, but if you go into an urban environment, they're using a lot less water. And the reason is that, our demands are driven by not just indoor residential use, but outdoor. And that's because it's the nature of the type of community we are. Back in, when I first arrived in Concord, I'm going to go to the next, in 96. And Bill Edgerton, the former director, came on board. He's a finance guy, and he looked at our rate structure and he said, we're not, positioned to have, we don't have a disincentive to be, using a lot of water. And what we did is we did an analysis of what does a typical residential user need, for kind of indoor purposes, what allowance can we provide for some outdoor, and where do we really see where the outdoor is driving the demand significantly. And we came with a tiered increasing block rate structure. So the more water you use over certain thresholds, the more you will pay per gallon. And it's a fairly significant, increase of 100% and 150% of the base use. That was kind of successful in curtailing some demand. And that was the intent. If people need to pay for this or they're using it as a premium, we want to make sure they had base level service, but if it's a premium, they're going to pay for it. And you can see this trend from, these are the average day demands, and this red line's kind of from 93 up to 2002. Then we started seeing the impact of our demand based on this conservation block rate system. And you can see a noticeable change in people's use. So that economic disincentive worked, and it's the responsible thing to do because our infrastructure is expensive to maintain and create. but there's also, a certain amount of challenge to do much better. Over the years, we've had a lot of focus on assisting people with their essential use, the indoor use, where they can save money and how. There's a lot of, we have local programs, there's state and federal programs as well. Alex has been very involved in kind of working with customers to promote these. The big challenge we have is the outdoor. And we've historically heard this, but I think the real issue is going to be, we're almost at the point where it's no longer going to be a polite, excuse us, can you curtail your use? I think it's going to start ratcheting up a little bit, because we are going to have regulatory consequences if we don't get control of our outdoor use. Typical, someone with an in-ground irrigation system will use 4 to 10 times more water than someone without. That's significant. And if you look at the balance and sustainability practices and that sort of thing, this is not sustainable. Now, there are ways to have outdoor use and, be a little bit more sustainable. And we're working with people in Concord on certain programs. You can see Zeroscape initiatives. I get out of this program, but I'm going to keep moving. But you can talk to Alex about some of these initiatives offline, or she can speak to them a little bit. But I want to keep moving on where we're going. This is a map of Massachusetts showing today, September, where water restrictions across the state. We're not alone. There's a lot of impact and interest in trying to curtail water use across the state. Some of these might be driven by supply problems. Some may be driven by regulatory needs. The regulatory drivers are the Water Management Act. And those are, that's an act that is administered through DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. It allows them to put controls on systems to try and enhance and encourage conservation. And the reason they do that is because it's sustainable, and there's other externality impacts when you're over pumping or drawing from any one source. And we appreciate there could be environmental impacts. And that is where the permit that Concord may be issued very soon may put some teeth into it, as far as, especially on our outdoor, watering initiatives. The competing interests, there's been a lot of modeling and studies done. There's tools online that we can access that look at environmental impacts on biology, on fish and flow, and that sort of things, in rivers and stream conditions that are really informing how we are being monitored and regulated moving forward. And there are triggers that may not be. In the past, we used to think a trigger was, we're having mechanical problems, we can't meet demand. We need to stop, we need to slow down because we can't maintain. Well, if you look right now, if you go back, this is a stream flow gauge, and it's an elevation of a stream, and it's continuously monitored. And this is a Concord River stream gauge. And it shows the elevation. As long as the elevation is above this base level flow, Concord would probably not be required to impose any restrictions. But generally, when the flow is less, or we're considered a drought condition, we will then likely be required, whether we can supply or not, to have restrictions and enforcement of those restrictions. When the level of the stream is lower than this line, we're in a drought. You'll notice we've been in a drought off and on since July. And there must have been some rainfall where we went above for a little bit, but in essence, from July, we're still in the drought. And we have not lifted. We have a 1 day a week watering restriction. It has not lifted, and we know people aren't using water, but we're not going to lift it until we're above that line. And there's a good chance we're going to go into the spring in a drought condition. We don't know. Mother Nature will inform us on that. In order to communicate this, we have a seasonal water management plan, and it's available on our website. And basically, various restrictions are imposed based on mechanical or environmental conditions. And you can see, and I would encourage you to go to our website, and it gives you the outdoor activity that's of interest and whether it's permitted or not in this column here. If you go across the rows, and this is when we are advisory in green, when there's a restriction, and we can impose a penalty when there's an outright ban. Restriction would be 1 day a week. Ban would be no outdoor use. And then there's an emergency, which could be more catastrophic. We hope we never get to that point, but that could happen. We plan the 1 day a week. To simplify it, it translates directly to the trash recycle pickup schedule. We've sort of borrowed this from some other communities, have found this is an effective way of at least letting people know when can I water if it is restricted. And basically that takes care of the demand management. In the interest of time, I don't know if people have questions. I would urge you to go to the website. We have lots of good information on that, but I'll entertain a question or two if people want on that.
Okay, here's a good one,
Yeah.
Diane, if I may. This is about the private wells. This has been a hot topic. The question from Peggy is, do private wells used for watering lawns, and I'll add in for private pools, do they affect the town well capacity? Private wells.
They are not so much an effect on the town wells, not so much. Only in the exception of, I will give you an example. Concord Country Club has a private well. That is something we're presently, managing and actually working with them on a permit, so they don't have an adverse impact on us. That's a large yielding private well. But most people with a residential well, their yields are somewhere about 5 gallons a minute, 10 gallons a minute. Don't have a significant impact. There were studies done in the 80s that demonstrated that. It could probably be updated, but it's more of the private well issue is a perception problem where it becomes the haves and have-nots when there's restrictions. And that's becoming a challenge across the state. So stay tuned on that matter. There is legislation out there to try and regulate private wells.
There's some information in the chat about fluoride, and I think the question about potential regulatory impacts has been answered. So I think we're ready to go on to the next section, Diane.
Thank you, Alan. In the interest of time, can you go to the NAGOG pond issues historically? And I think what we're going to have to do, if you have the time, is to have you come back and talk about
Wastewater? That'd be fine. If you're okay with that, that'd be great.
I mean, we're just not going to get to it. I can
Yeah.
see we have 10 minutes left. So if you could help us understand the NAGOG, the whole
Okay.
kind of legal issues and our relationship with Acton and how all that's working right now, and what
Okay.
you foresee in the future. And
Okay.
as sewage, we'll do that next time.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize.
No, we're learning so much. I mean, it's just fantastic. So don't worry, we'll figure this out. Okay.
We got the rest of it already packaged for later. We're good. So NAGOG, a little bit of an overview. There's a lot of history. I came on board, this is fascinating. NAGOG has been, I don't know how to frame this. The month I was hired, we put online the ozone, the enhanced disinfection facility in November of 1996. I've been living with the NAGOG legacy ever since. It's unbelievable what, they didn't have salt and pepper hair back then, I know that. In any event, the authority for taking of the water was in 1884. It goes a long time. And that was William Wheeler, brilliant guy, identifying a need for supply. We have legislation that gives us authority to take the waters. In 1909, they constructed the infrastructure. Again, this is before there was power out there. So it's gravity fed through 16-inch pipe that's still in place, pretty good condition. We may line it at some point soon, but it comes all the way through 2A into Concord. And there are actually some Acton customers who are fed by Concord Supply because that line was put in along 2A. It went online in 1909. In 1985, That was an important process as far as water rights. That's when the state imposed Water Management Act. It said, we need to take all of the, we know water, competing water demands and interests are out there. We need to manage water in a more holistic way. And we have all this legislation and rights that are all over the map as far as what and how communities can serve themselves. We need a new approach. And that's what sort of created the Water Management Act. When the Water Management Act was created, it said, and there was lots of discussion on how this would be imposed, we developed this framework where there will be an allowance to existing customers. Because we're talking about future growth and competing interests. We're going to allow existing users to register their sources, in essence, grandfather those rights. And moving forward, we are going to impose, we're going to require that you seek a permit through the state, and we will evaluate the impact of that new withdrawal or new source, and we will put conditions on it. If you pre-exist, they really went over and struggled with, do we condition pre-existing rights? And they determined, no, not a good idea. They were watching some other states who were going through the same problem, I think specifically New Jersey. But, so they said, if you register, give us your documentation of what you've used between 1980 and 85, and we're going to say that is your right, and we will give it to you as a source and a quantity. And so, that was how they decided to implement. Moving forward, any changes or increases, we're going to permit, and we're going to condition it based on a host of factors, primarily environmental sustainability measures. So in '85, fascinating, I was working for the town of Littleton at the time. My first job, one of my first jobs was to compile Littleton's registration request to DEP.
Which is you.
Yeah, so I will tell you, NAGOG was not part of that registration request. I'm just saying. But in any event, it wasn't even on our radar. It was Concord's water supply. We didn't have it on our radar. In 1994, in the late 80s, 1989, EPA developed a surface water treatment rule. That meant they were concerned about water quality and disinfection, and primarily microbiological, contaminants. And you could get a waiver from a full-blown filtration facility if your quality was protected and of good condition. And so Concord, back in the early 90s, did testing. They did the analysis of what a treatment facility might cost, and they determined, let's maintain the waiver. Let's seek a waiver. We'll do enhanced disinfection. That's the ozone facility. It was constructed and put online in 1996. So that was an important, again, regulatory trigger. Town did not put the filtration plant because it didn't have to, and it was wanted to wait. 2003, there was a lot of, I don't think I kept that slide. I took it out. I shouldn't have taken it out. We have land, over 100 acres of property abutting NAGOG to protect it. We've protected NAGOG for over 100 years. It isn't developed because Concord protected it. Recent to us was a large parcel that our suction main went through, and we opted to work with an abutter who realized, we want to develop this. Can we swap some land? Because you have in the middle of our land, you have a parcel that says filtration facility. That was done in 1934, I think. Concord realized it may need to treat. Being a good neighbor, allowing Acton to develop some, housing, we went through a legislative land swap where Concord released land, allowed it to become part of the development, and we got land abutting our existing property that we would put a future filtration facility. Very friendly. In 2007, Quail Ridge went through development. They went to a golf course. They subsequently went to a over 55, sort of dense residential development. And we've been in permitting nightmares since 2015 of trying to install this facility that was, neighborly land swaps and all sorts of communication. And we have been going through a very tortuous permitting process in Acton over the past 5 years. It's been really remarkable. You then get into, during that time, Littleton needed water, and they started looking at developing bedrock wells. So this is Nagog. This is 119. The town lines of Acton over here, Littleton over here. Littleton started looking at developing bedrock wells. These are 600-foot deep wells that would extract up to, over 500,000 gallons a day or even more. And what we realize is these wells are being put in very close proximity to Nagog Pond. They're in bedrock. We challenge Littleton. We think you might be extracting water that's coming to Nagog Pond. Littleton suggested it wasn't. We've had a lot of technical back and forth on this. It's been a debate. It triggered Littleton to evaluate, what about the water rights of Nagog Pond? Wait a minute, we think we have rights from 1884. They've tried to impress upon Concord that they had rights that predate the Water Management Act registration. And in essence, that's been the litigation that Concord and Littleton, and Acton actually is also sort of partnered with Littleton to engage to determine what is the priority rights and superior rights to the water withdrawal from Nagog. Is it legislation from 1884, or is it Water Management Act, which was a more recent contemporary legislation to manage the waters of Massachusetts? So that, in a nutshell, is the debate without getting into the detailed litigation. It's the concept of what act is superior.
Alan, so this is still in litigation, right?
It is still in litigation. It was heard by the SJC. We did go to land court last year, and Concord prevailed. Argument prevailed. It was appealed by Littleton and Acton. We both agreed to take it to the SJC, and it was heard just on Tuesday of this week, with findings probably in 3 to 6 months.
3 to 6 months, okay. So can it be appealed after that? Should the Supreme Judicial Court, are they the final arbiter, or
I believe they are the final arbiter. That's why we took it to the SJC.
Okay. Thank you. We can look for that that decision, or the ultimate deliberation. How can people figure out?
I'm still trying to figure. I don't know yet. I will probably make that. We can make that available when we know. I'm not exactly sure. It was a Zoom. Interesting. It was a Zoom deliberation. Arguments made. It was fascinating. So.
Okay. So in 3 to 6 months, we'll be looking for some final deliberation.
Well, this is a big issue for Concord. It's been a lot of time and resources invested, but we can get up to 1.5 million gallons a day. Well, historically, we got well over 2 million gallons a day for sustained periods of time. The question is, we need to treat it with a filtration facility and secure the long-term rights.
This has been absolutely fascinating, and you can see by the number of questions that pop up in the chat that people are thoroughly engaged in the presentation that you've made, Alan, and Alex, and John. We'll get to you next time. I wanted to, thank you. I wanted to say that what we all know is that water is the new oil. The cost of water, and you used a wonderful, the disincentive to use, is going to have to become more and more powerful, just as gasoline at the pump became increasingly expensive, so that we paid attention to our usage. And clearly that we all need, individually and as a community, to think about when we turn on our tap, when we turn it off, and how much water we use. Thank you so much, not only for this morning, but just for the work that you do. It is essentially invisible. in so many ways, and yet it has a powerful influence on the health and well-being of our community. So we are deeply grateful for the work that you do and look forward to having you back soon to talk with us about the effluent aspects of all of this. One quick question, is anyone checking those effluents for COVID?
I will very quickly. We did a round of tests. So early on, BioBots is a firm out of Boston,
Right.
sort of promoting this technology. We weren't sure at the time of how viable it was. I can tell you it was fairly expensive to engage. We did pilot it. We tried it at our treatment facility. We got results that were a little bit surprising. And one of the challenges, not that they were high, they were incredibly low. And one of the challenges is it's, I think, helpful and informative regionally. And we could have been participating in regional analysis. But our challenge was, is it worth the investment, especially when we have something like Emerson Hospital and MC, we didn't know what was the results going to tell us. Is it about Concord or not? And it was fairly expensive. And so we kind of made the decision, we're kind of minding your dollars. And we didn't think there was going to be the return on that investment. And I've read various, kind of articles about it. I think it's informing regionally. It's good, it's useful, but there's some, it's not fail-safe, that's for sure.
Thank you, Alan. That's because it is a pressing issue right now, not only in the town of Concord, but in our country. So thank you all so much. Thank you, everybody who attended and participated in all of this. And we look forward to seeing you in January, where we might adjust our program a little bit. The Town Government Committee meeting will be on December 15th at 2 o'clock. A URL will be available. So if you want to join us then, please do, as we tweak these first Fridays going forward. Thank you all very much, and happy holidays to everyone.
Yeah.